Holly Williams reports from Ukraine, and we'll turn to her in a moment. But first, Nancy Cordes is at the White House, where Presidents Trump and Zelensky were joined by several other European leaders. And Nancy, there seems to be some kind of early signs of progress today.
There does indeed, John. Tonight, the president says he has begun to make arrangements for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, which would be a first if it happens. Trump spoke to Putin by phone after meeting with Zelensky and a host of European power players for about 5 hours and easing some of their fears that he might be siding with Putin.
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this meeting.
It was a striking show of support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The leaders of France, Italy, the UK, and more all arrayed around a table with him and President Trump to talk peace.
Something is changing, something has changed thanks to you.
Their tone was friendly, but their message was designed to gently counteract Trump's chummy meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, where Putin convinced Trump to drop his demand for a ceasefire as a prelude to a more lasting peace deal. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that, and let's try to put pressure on Russia.
In the 6 wars that I've settled, I haven't had a ceasefire.
The European leaders were also alarmed by Trump's seeming openness to Putin's latest proposal, which would involve Ukraine handing over the entire Donbas region, including a 2,600 square mile swath that Russian troops do not currently control. Putin also reportedly proposed that the rest of the battle lines be frozen in place, which would give Russia de facto control over more than 20% of Ukrainian territory.
The war's going to end.
In the Oval Office today, there was none of the tension that marred Zelensky's last visit 6 months ago.
You got to be more thankful. Because let me tell you, you don't have the cards.
Today, Trump left the door open to post-war U.S. peacekeeping troops who would help prevent a repeat invasion of Ukraine.
This is such an important issue.
That was a big relief to all the leaders, Zelensky most of all.
This is very important that the United States gives such strong signal and is ready for security guarantees.
Nancy, you've watched a lot of these foreign leaders interact with the president. What struck you about today?
Well, John, for starters, they clearly all learned what works with President Trump, and aggressive pushback often does not. But there also seemed to be genuine gratitude that at least this conversation with Putin is finally taking place, even if it isn't taking place exactly the way they want it to.
And Nancy, there seems to have been specific discussion about security guarantees for Ukraine. Was there any specificity, or what level of it, about the question of territory, land?
No, Trump aides said that that would be a major topic of conversation today, but Zelensky pushed back. He said that any talk about territory needs to wait until he's sitting face-to-face with Vladimir Putin, where they're both making concessions. President Trump seemed to respect that, and he said he's going to try to set up that meeting as soon as possible, John.
Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thank you, Nancy. Russia launched a heavy wave of drones and missiles on Ukraine overnight, hitting more than 24 locations. Holly Williams has been covering Russia's invasion since it started, and she reports tonight from the capital city of Kyiv.
Just before sunrise this morning, Ukraine says a swarm of Russian drones destroyed part of this apartment complex in the city of Kharkiv.
God.
The attack killed at least 5, according to local officials. Rescue workers tried to save this baby girl, but she didn't survive. There were many families living here, small children, said this woman. There are no officers here or anything else. Ukrainians have fought courageously to defend their country. But Vladimir Putin's forces now have the upper hand on the battlefield. Many Ukrainians are skeptical that he really wants peace or will stick to any agreement he signs, because he's broken them in the past. Some here are furious that President Trump appears to be pressuring Ukraine to make concessions. Their meetings and talks are a pure circus, said this woman in Kyiv. I think Trump is pro-Russian. And this woman simply said that President Trump is a traitor.
And Holly Williams joins us now from Kyiv. Holly, how many reporting trips have you taken to Ukraine?
John, we were here in 2022 when the invasion began. My 12th since then, but I've been reporting from Ukraine since 2014 when Ukrainians toppled their then pro-Russian government just down the street here.
How has the spirit of the Ukrainian people changed between when you started and now?
John, the Ukrainians have been fighting so defiantly, but there's also no question that they're exhausted and they've taken hundreds of thousands of casualties. In fact, a recent poll found only 70% of Ukrainians now associated. That's up from just over 20% at the start of the invasion.
Given that fatigue, if the U.S. could promise security guarantees that Russia would be blocked, and might the Ukrainians a loss of some land?
I think there's no consensus. I think some Ukrainians would see any territorial concessions as a capitulation. Others might be willing to accept them. But I think all Ukrainians know that international agreements have failed to protect them in the past. I'm around.
Holly Williams in Kyiv. Thank you, Holly. Now more of the top stories from around the world in tonight's Evening News Roundup. Storm trackers shot this dramatic video in the eye of Hurricane Erin on Friday, even before it became a Category 4 with 130-mile-an-hour winds. Erin is still well off the Atlantic, but its effects are leading to evacuations along North Carolina's Outer Banks and dangerous conditions elsewhere. CBS's Christian Benavides checks out the situation in Miami Beach.
We went out on patrol with Miami Beach Ocean Rescue. 56 lifeguards are currently on duty here with 38 towers set up in areas where rip currents typically form. So how do you identify where a rip current is?
Through the deeper, darker colored water. Or you can use the seaweed, for example, that's indicating it's pulling out to shore.
The worst of the waves and the highest risk for rip currents are expected to start tomorrow and into Wednesday.
Lonnie Quinn will have more on the storm coming up. In the northern Utah city of Tremonton, 2 police officers were shot and killed. They were responding to a domestic dispute when a gunman came out of the house and started firing. Bystanders eventually persuaded him to lay down his weapons. He's now in custody, charged with aggravated murder. The so-called ketamine queen, charged with supplying Matthew Perry with the drug that killed him, has agreed to plead guilty. Josephine Sunga is the last of 5 defendants to accept a plea deal, avoiding a trial that was scheduled for next month. She could face decades in prison. President Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C.'s police force is intensifying. Today, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana became the latest Republican-led states to say they're sending National Guard troops. Scott McFarland reports now on the impact of the federal crackdown not only on crime in the capital, but business.
The number of National Guard troops on the streets and in the neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. is poised to more than double. The Republican governors of at least a half-dozen states have deployed hundreds more. West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey saying he wants to help restore cleanliness and safety in the nation's capital.
This doesn't make sense. You know what doesn't make sense?
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says the sight of troops policing U.S. citizens on U.S. soil is un-American and unwarranted, with violent crime down 26% this year.
The numbers on the ground in the district don't support 1,000 people from other states coming to Washington, D.C.
President Trump touted the second week of his takeover of D.C. police and deployment of hundreds of federal agents.
People that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner, and the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
It is absolutely not true.
Mark Rutstein says his Northwest D.C. bar has lost up to 75% of its business and says if these drops, reported by restaurant industry website Open Table, continue, there will be trouble.
You know, I'm not going to let it fail, but we will be at the bank asking for money.
In a video from the Washington Post this weekend, a masked federal agent helping make an arrest is questioned by onlookers.
Oh, you guys are ruining this country. You know that, right?
And responded this way.
Whoever's already ruined it.
In Southeast D.C., Anthony Mohammed says the police takeover does have some supporters here.
What do you think about having these extra bodies on the ground deployed?
You needed help. You cried for help. Now you have the help. So now you can't dictate the way to help
Some